Thank you. I know many of you have driven a long way to come hear me tonight. And thank you very much for taking the time and the effort to come see me. I'm going to tell you my personal story, and I'm also going to talk to you about the research. And what's most remarkable is this research was funded by Ashton Embry's group, Direct MS Charity. And it's the pioneering, yes, we give him a huge hurrah. It is the pioneering work of foundations that invest in scientists who are doing the truly cutting edge, innovative work. And we do these small pilot studies that everyone thinks is a crazy dumbass idea. But they believed in me, gave me some money, and we'll get to share some of that very exciting results. However, let's go on. I need to give you my conflict of interest disclosures because as this is part of my conflict of interest management plan for the University of Iowa, that whenever I speak, I will tell you who funds my research. Direct MS Charity is the biggest funder. I also get some funding from DJO Incorporated, who is the maker of the electrical therapy devices, Pinnacle Life, who gave us some vitamins and supplements, TZ Press, that's me. I donated some books and study materials to our study. I also own some companies. I have copyrights to my first book, Minding My Mitochondria, which is out of print, and the new book, The Wahls Protocol, again, which Dr. Embry's group so generously has given many of you. Okay, so forgive me, these stats are from the United States. I'm sure Canada is facing similar challenges. We have an epidemic of chronic disease that will crush our economic system, as well because we can't deal with the high cost of all of this. We have about 25 million people with diabetes, about 25 million with heart disease, about 25 million with cancer, 25 million with an autoimmune diagnosis of some type, another 50 million who have fatigue, pain. They see their doctor, they get lots of tests, they're finally told, well, you have some autoantibodies, but there's not enough damage to make a diagnosis yet. So that's about 75 million people with some type of autoimmune process. And we are getting more and more overweight. In America, that's 220 million. 69% of us are either overweight or obese. And our brains are in big trouble. We have 25% of the adults that will have a mental health problem requiring medication. We have 5 million with dementia, 1 in 3 seniors. We have 1.5 million children with autism spectrum disorder. It's now 1 in 50 children who are born will develop autism. When I was in medical school, that was a rare condition. We have 1 million with Parkinson's, 800,000 with multiple sclerosis, and 200,000 with schizophrenia. Multiple sclerosis. When you're first diagnosed, a few people have the good fortune to have benign disease. 80% will have relapsing remitting. That means you have an acute flare of symptoms, that's known as a relapse. Then your body begins to put in sodium channels, and you are able to transmit nervous impulses again somewhat, and that leads to improved function. That's called a remission. The vast majority of those with relapsing remitting will ultimately convert into secondary progressive. In that stage of the disease, things continue to slowly decline and worsen. And then there's some folks who have primary progressive. They never have an acute relapse. They just steadily, slowly decline from the beginning. And that's about 10%. Now, my story, I had the good fortune, and actually I do consider this good fortune now, to develop multiple sclerosis. Now, in retrospect, my symptoms first began during medical school with episodes of lancinating pain here at my temple. Sharp electrical pains would come and go. They would come on randomly. They were more likely to occur during severe stress, deprivation. I was a resident, and so there's plenty of stress during residency. Then the next problem occurred in 2000, and I developed weakness in my left leg. I went to see physicians who did a complete evaluation, sent me to neurology, and I had abnormal lesions in my spinal cord, abnormal spinal fluid. And they said, based on my chart review, they saw that I think 15 years earlier I'd had an episode of dim vision in my left eye. So they said, you probably had optic neuritis, and what you have is relapsing remitting multiple sclerosis. Now, the problem is I knew the natural history is sort of an ugly one. Within 10 years, 1/2 of people diagnosed with MS will be unable to work because of severe fatigue. And 1/3 will have difficulty walking, needing a cane, walker, or wheelchair. And I had 2 young children, ages 6 and 9. I was the main breadwinner for our family. And so I did not like that natural history. I naturally sought out the best MS center I could find because I'm an academic doc. I'm going to treat my disease aggressively, take the best, the latest, the newest drugs, see the best people in the country, because that's what an academic doc does. So I went to the Cleveland Clinic. They looked over my records and they said, yes, you have relapsing remitting MS. They reviewed the treatments. They were the ABCR treatments. Now, there's also the biologic treatments like Tysabri, Gilenya, Tecfidera. For secondary progressive MS, you can take chemotherapy in the form of Novantrone. And if you have primary progressive MS, there's no approved treatments that are available. So naturally, I decided to take one of the ABCR drugs. And again, I saw the best people at the best institutions. But things were not going so well. In 2002, my Cleveland Clinic neurologist said, there's this guy, Dr. Embry. He has a website. Why don't you go check that out? And through that, I was introduced to Lauren Cordain and learned about the paleo diet. And after 20 years of being a vegetarian, I decided the science made sense. I went back to eating meat. And I removed grain, legumes, and dairy from my diet. So it was a big change. And I also want to tell you, when I was a vegetarian, I was eating plenty of beans and grains and vegetables. I was not a white flour, sugar kind of vegetarian. So this is the kind of stuff I was eating. Eggs, vegetables, meat. I was not doing a lot of liver at that time, I'll confess. But the problem was, I still declined. The following year, my physician told me I'd transitioned to secondary progressive multiple sclerosis, recommended a scooter, and then changed their mind and said no. Because of the severe fatigue, the weakness in the torso muscles, I think you'll do better with a tilt-recline wheelchair. I got that. I took Novantrone, a form of chemotherapy, did several cycles, got to have neutropenic complications. It was not easy. And I continued to slowly decline. Then Tysabri came available, and I took that. And then when that was pulled from the market, I went to Cellcept, which is another immune-suppressing drug that is given primarily in the setting of transplants. But I continued to slowly decline. My fatigue got worse. The amount of walking that I could do decreased. And when I hit the wheelchair, I realized that conventional medicine was unlikely to stop the slide into a bedridden and potentially demented life. And that's when I began reading the basic science. I started reading the rat studies, the mouse studies. I started going on PubMed.gov every day. I'd spend a few minutes reading. This paper is really pretty intriguing. It's from Walter Willett. And he says, basically, we've been able to identify diet and lifestyle factors that account for 70 to 90% of why we get high blood pressure, obesity, diabetes, heart disease, and a number of cancers. And those factors he identified were diet quality, smoking status, and physical activity level. And that was really pretty interesting. And then when I was looking for MS information, I found this data, which has recently been updated, now in 2010, but it identified if you had a sibling or a parent with MS, your risk of getting MS was 3 to 5%. If you had two parents, your risk was 30%. Always the environmental factors were the main driver of why you got MS. That is huge, the environmental factors. Okay, and again, this is just more scientific papers that say, and there are hundreds, maybe thousands of papers like this that will say, we've been able to identify genes, so actually now it's up to 100 genes that increase your risk for MS ever so slightly. It's a complicated interaction between the genes that each of us have, and our environmental factors that will determine if you get MS or what diseases you may get. It's a very complex interaction. So what are these environmental factors? And some of the factors that epidemiology says, the most important factor is prior history of Epstein-Barr virus, smoking, childhood obesity, and the vitamin D insufficiency. And of course, that's a big deal up here in Canada. You guys have a hard time maintaining your vitamin D. We also have a hard time in the United States because we live and work inside, and the physicians, including me for years, told you to put on sunscreen when you go outside so you can't make vitamin D even if you're outside. Okay, so this study looked at a whole bunch of studies and said what were the factors that were helpful. And they said there's a slight benefit for using omega-6 fatty acids, but it was inconclusive. So again, we're still like, what are the environmental factors? What are the dietary factors that can help? In this study, it looked at animal models and said what is helpful. And we have things like omega-3 fatty acids, phytosterols, so that's basically nuts and seeds, and acetylcysteine, which is NAC, uric acid, lipoic acid, polyphenols, those are antioxidants, ginkgo, curcumin, and vitamin B12. Animal studies, not human studies. And some interesting epidemiology that says milk proteins, if you got milk in your diet, you have a higher risk for getting MS. That's pretty compelling. And there are some studies that have said people with MS have a higher than expected rate for anti-gluten or anti-gliadin antibodies, but no prospective randomized controlled trials. And again, in animal models, probiotics are helpful, and but not always. And there's an interesting study that shows eating pig whipworm, taking a drink of that every 6 weeks, decreases the relapse rate by 30%. Sort of like the ABCR drugs. Okay, this is a lovely paper, gluten sensitivity from gut to brain, and he says, quote, in some individuals, gluten sensitivity was shown to manifest solely with neurologic dysfunction. Let me repeat that. In some individuals, gluten sensitivity manifests solely with neurologic dysfunction. And furthermore, 90% of those with gluten sensitivity have 0 symptoms in the gut. Here are some MRIs of people with gluten sensitivity who have what looks like a MS brain. They have white lesions, okay? Now back to me. NARCOMS is a North American Research Committee on Multiple Sclerosis. It does quality of life surveys every 6 months. I've been doing this since 2003. I'm just showing you my data from 2005 through 2007. And what you see is I've been getting a little worse every year. My fatigue, which was moderate, went to severe, went to total, which meant it interfered with every aspect of my life. Infrequent cane meant you could still walk a few feet. And I wasn't yet at a walker. And that's a picture of me. I was still working full-time, and I'm very grateful the university and the VA redesigned my job multiple times to keep me at work. I could not sit up in a chair like you guys are. My belly and back was too weak. If I sat up in a chair like this, I'd be in 10 minutes so exhausted that I'd have to lay flat on my back for the next 4 hours to recover. I had a zero gravity chair like this at work, another at home. I used my tilt-recline wheelchair to get everywhere. I could walk short distances using 2 walking sticks. Otherwise, as in my zero grav chair or in bed. Now, the epigenetic factors. This is a hot new area of research. This is how factors in your environment speak to your genes, turning genes on and making them active, turning other genes off and making them silent. And in so doing, will change how you run the chemistry of life. If that happens when you're in your mommy's tummy and you're a little embryo, it can cause malformations, congenital defects. If it happens when we're fully developed as children or adults, it will change how you run the chemistry of life, making what should have been a healthy, disease-resistant body into an inflamed, sickly, disease-prone body. Now, these are the most powerful factors, and the ones that I'm going to be talking about: diet quality, toxin exposure, physical activity level, and stress levels. But really, every aspect of your life speaks to your genes. The infections that you've had ever since you were born. The microbiome, that's the 100 trillion bacteria, yeast, and parasites that live in your bowels. The balance of hormones, your sex hormones, your stress hormones, your thyroid hormones, and your vitamin D level. The trauma, physical trauma and psychological trauma. Socialization, your family connections and social work, even your thoughts. All of this can speak to your genes and shift how your cells will run the chemistry of life. So I created a protocol based on diet, toxins, exercise, stress reduction. And after 3 months, my fatigue was gone. I was able to stop Provigil, the medication I had taken for 5 years. At 6 months, I was walking throughout the hospital without a cane. And at 12 months, I was able to do a 20-mile bike ride with my family. We wrote up a case report, and then I started writing a protocol to do research. And I wrote a grant to direct MS Charity, and they gave me money. And we started a study. And I'm going to tell you about that study. So what we did was the same interventions that I used, copied as closely as I could reasonably copy, and that we could monitor. And it comes down to a modified Paleolithic diet, and I will tell you what that is. A home exercise program, electrical stimulation of muscles, a stress management program, and targeted vitamins and supplements. This is what we call a feasibility study. All studies, when you first start, you do them in a very small group of people to show that they are safe, that they can be done, and all you need to show is that there is a trend in the right direction, that you aren't making people worse, that you're making them maybe a little tiny bit better. Then you can calculate the power, and I know how big the study needs to be, and I write a new grant, and then we do a bigger one. You could start out with 10, you go to 20, to 30, to 40, and so on. So the big question was, could people do this intervention? Would I cause any harm? So that's the feasibility, the safety, and then we had a secondary question. That is, if they actually could do that stuff, did it make any difference? Was the trend in the right direction? So the modified paleo diet. Our ancestors, for 2.5 million years, we're the Homo, that's the genus, the family. Then for 500,000 years, we're the Homo sapiens, that's the species. And traditional people have eaten a wide variety of things all over the world, but they didn't eat grain, dairy, or legumes until about 10,000 years ago. So I started with a Paleolithic framework, but then I used science to help me organize this. So I could make sure I was getting the vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, essential fats, amino acids that science said brain cells need to thrive. And I used information from the Institute for Functional Medicine, a terrific organization, and one I recommend highly. And I used scientific papers, some great papers by Boer that looked at the micronutrient and macronutrient needs of brain cells. And there's a new paper out, one by Bowman, that correlated brain size with nutrient levels of vitamins, minerals, antioxidants. And we came up basically with 31 different nutrients that we were tracking. And I created a food plan to make sure that I was going to be getting a rich supply of these 31 nutrients that I knew brain cells needed. And I presumed if I designed my diet around that, I would probably pick up hundreds, if not thousands, of other critical nutrients that were good for my brain cells. So, lots of vegetables, folks. And this is designed, remember, I'm tall, 6 foot tall, so I eat a lot. So it's 3 cups of green leaves, 3 cups of sulfur-containing vegetables, 3 cups of deeply pigmented vegetables and berries. We recommended omega-3 oils, as in 2 tablespoons of a flax or a hemp oil. I wanted to have sufficient animal protein, preferably 6 ounces to 12 ounces, depending on gender and size. We specifically excluded gluten-containing grains, dairy, and eggs, because these are the foods that are most likely to cause an abnormal immune response. And we wanted people to stop sugar, white flour, processed foods. We told them you're going to have to cook at home. We gave them recipes, gave them some instructions. And if they're going to have a gluten-free product, we limited that to 2 servings a week. So in recap, here's the visual for you, daily. 3 cups of greens, 3 cups of sulfur, 3 cups of color. If you're a guy, that's easy. If you're a petite lady, of course you can't eat 9 cups. It's going to be, more like 6. We're not expecting people to eat beyond satiety. But if you have all those vegetables, it crowds out the bad food. We encouraged grass-fed meat, wild fish, wild game. Also encouraged gardening. Encouraged organ meats, salmon. And we encourage the use of seaweed, because seaweed provides iodine trace minerals that are very important for the processing of toxins and very important for manufacturing myelin. We encouraged going organic, if that was possible. We also talked about the environmental working group, Dirty Dozen and Clean 15. If you Google that, they have many wonderful resource guides to help you prioritize how you're going to spend your grocery money. And of course, people thought this was sort of a radical diet. Was it really safe? And so we did some analyses of the diet. And what I'm showing is the study diet versus the average American diet for women my age. And what you see is the study diet has 2 to 3 times the nutritional content of the average American diet. We had some targeted vitamins and supplements. We put people on the same regimen that I'd used, but told them if they perceived any problem with the vitamins and supplements, they could discontinue them. We taught them how to do stretching, because shortened muscles is very, very common with MS. And we designed a strength training program that was tailored to their level of disability. People who were more severely disabled had a shorter, easier training program than those who were still walking well. And we trained them on doing electrical stimulation of muscles. We did some test sessions to be sure that they could tolerate that. We found that not everyone could tolerate electrical stimulation of muscles, and if they couldn't tolerate it, they were not eligible for the study. Everyone had a 2-week run-in where they were trained on stretching, trained on the diet, kept daily logs, and then were to come back, complete the assessments. And we found that in the first group that we enrolled, there were 3 individuals who said the diet was just not something they could do, and they chose not to return. So we had, when we did, you have to go through what's called an IRB, Institutional Review Board, that determines the safety and provides oversight. They had said that this intervention was so new that they wanted us to do 10 people, provide a safety report, and then they would determine if we could do the second 10. So we did 10, we gave our safety report, and then they let us do the second 10. We've written up the experience of the first 10 in this paper, and you have a copy of that. So the first question is, can they do it, and is it safe? So, so far, we've actually gotten 20 all the way through. But I'm only giving you the data on the first 10, because that's the only data that's been published. But I will tell you we had 20 already go through. And the biggest side effect was if you were overweight, you lost weight without being hungry. And you got back to the weight you had often in your early 20s. People would come in and say, the weight is falling off. I can't stuff another forkful of food into my mouth. And by the way, this is the best I've felt in years. And this is what I see in my clinics where I use these interventions as well. We had some skin burns. We had 2 skin burns. They were relatively mild. We just had them not stim that area. And then we provided remedial education to them and to us about how to use the electrical therapy device. Many folks found that vitamins and supplements were onerous or they had GI side effects. And essentially only one person took the regimen intact all the way to the end. So in the second 10, we do simplify that regimen considerably. Diet adherence. Every day, people filled out the log, what they ate, and classified it, green sulfur color, did they have any boo-boos, excluded foods. And then we determined, was it a compliant day? Because you ate green sulfur color, and you didn't eat any of the excluded foods. So if you did those 2 things, so ate the right stuff and none of the wrong stuff, that was a compliant day. We were still, I believe, at 95% compliance at 12 months. My public health research colleagues said, oh my God, that is amazing. And exercise E-stim. If you did E-stim or exercise or both, we counted that as a compliant day. So more than 80% of the days, these folks were exercising. Again, my public health colleagues say, that's really extraordinary. Getting people to sustain diet and lifestyle changes for so long really is quite remarkable. So this is the total amount of green sulfur color, all the good foods you're supposed to have. And they start out at 1.6 servings a day, which is probably typical, my guess, of Canadians. That's pretty typical of Americans. People are not eating vegetables. And we got them up to almost 7 cups a day. That's extraordinary. My public health colleagues tell me if they see a study where they are able to get the participants to increase the number of vegetables eaten per day by 1 serving. At the end of the year, that's a home run. So they look at this and they go like, man, this is extraordinary. And it really is. We radically changed how people viewed food. And we got them to stretch and do their exercises. And we got them to do the neuromuscular E-stim. So this is our nutrition data, and this is just from the first 8 subjects, so again, incomplete data. People lost weight. Homocysteine, which you like a lower number, because that's an indicator that your vitamin, your folate and B12 and pyridoxine, so your B vitamin processes in your brain are not working very well. Homocysteine rises, and that's actually a toxic compound to brain. So lowering homocysteine is very good. Lowering triglycerides means that your insulin level is lowered and that you're more sensitive to insulin. That's also very good. B12 and folate, necessary for your brain, those were higher, also very good. So biologic biomarkers changing in the right direction. This is the perceived fatigue score for everyone individually. And you see, most people, things are going down. There are a couple that do not go down, and I'll comment on that in just a moment. Now, to summarize it for you, the fatigue severity scale, which goes from 7 to 1, 1 equal no fatigue, decreased by 2.38 points from a baseline of 5.70 at baseline to 3.32 at 12 months. P-value 0.0008. Now, do you remember when I told you we did this feasibility study? When you have small numbers, no one expects you to have statistically significant results. We expect you to have only a trend in the right direction. And we have statistical significance that's quite extraordinary at 12 months with only 8 people that made it to the 12 months. Really, quite extraordinary. Now for comparisons, like, okay, so is that a big deal or not? Maybe there are other drugs that work really well for fatigue. There aren't. The exercise treatments, and there are several studies out there using resistance training, strength training. They can get an improvement of 0.6. 0.6. And our improvement was 2.38. And the drug studies are variable. Some show improvement, others show no statistical difference. The best study that we could find was this one, which was using Provigil, the medication that I had used for several years, 5 years. And it reduced fatigue severity scale score by 0.75. P-value 0.07. That is not statistically significant. Certainly a favorable trend, but not statistically significant. And fatigue is the most disabling problem with MS. Okay. So, I'm going to give you a couple of Wahls warrior stories here. I take care of people at traumatic brain injury clinic, and I talk a lot about diet and lifestyle. And we find this to be very helpful for them to improve their recovery, improve their mental health, improve the PTSD. In primary care, it does quite a number of things. This is Julie, and she says the Wahls Protocol program saved my life. She has type 1 diabetes since age 10. She also developed sarcoidosis and renal failure. Was told that she was probably going to need dialysis very shortly. Her friends had heard me speak in one of my first talks back in Iowa City, I believe back in 2008. And they went and talked to Julie. And so they started preparing Wahls compliant meals. I mean, she must have had incredible friends. And her kidneys healed. She has normal kidney function. She doesn't have sarcoidosis anymore, and her insulin requirement is minimal. She still needs insulin, she always will. She's a type 1 diabetic. She looks great, doesn't have any peripheral neuropathy, feels like $1,000,000, and she can tell if she has a non-compliant day, she feels terrible the next day. This lady has secondary progressive MS. She became bedridden. She heard about me, got my purple book, Minding My Mitochondria, and started the dietary program. And she came back to hear me speak about 3 months after she had started her program. And she told me that she had started walking again a little bit. Her energy was up, and she'd had pretty good use of her hands, and so she was back helping prepare meals again. And so she felt like, this was really, in her mind, quite miraculous. This is Brent. He was a big guy. He was taking 2 pills for diabetes mellitus, 1 pill for high blood pressure, 1 pill for high cholesterol. He got my book, started the Wahls diet, and then progressed up to Paleo Plus, and he lost 95 pounds without being hungry and takes no medication. And he says, this is the best I have felt in decades. And this is Jane. Jane had fibromyalgia, diabetes, high blood pressure. She was on 3 pills for diabetes, 2 for high blood pressure. She had chronic severe pain and was on a number of pain meds. She found my program, lost 200 pounds, now takes no pills for her diabetes, high blood pressure, and requires minimal medication for pain. And she too says if she has a non-compliant day, she has horrific pain the following day. And so she's learned to be very meticulous on her diet. Now, most of you got a copy of the book, but this is for those future audience. The book really details the program that I use for myself and the types of things that I'm studying. In the first part of the book, I review the science of conventional medicine and how functional medicine understands the environmental factors. Things like the microbiome, like how mitochondria work, the toxic load, hormonal balance, cellular membranes, and how all of these factors are the root cause of why we become ill, and how we can use diet and lifestyle, and sometimes targeted supplements, and sometimes targeted medications to get to the root cause of why you developed an inflamed, sickly, disease-prone body. Then I also talk about the internal motivation. Changing one's diet and lifestyle is not an easy thing. In my clinical experience in clinics and in our clinical trials, I see this as successful when this is a family intervention, when the whole family embraces this is a new way of thinking about living, a new way of thinking about nourishing my body and my brain cells the very best that I can, getting rid of the poisons. When the family does the intervention, people will be successful. When the individual does the intervention by themselves, they fail, nearly always, because we are all addicted to sugar, white flour, gluten, and the proteins in dairy. And so I talk about the critical role of why you are doing this, what is your internal motivation, and how to work together as a family for this intervention to be successful. Then in part 2, I review how I developed the dietary programs, and I ease people from the standard Canadian diet or standard American diet or standard Western diet that is 6 to 10 servings of white flour, 150 pounds of sugar every year, or 110 pounds of white flour, into a diet that has more vegetables and sufficient protein. And I do provide a way of doing this as a vegetarian and as a vegan. I talk about the health risks of vegetarian vegans and how to fine-tune your diet to minimize those risks. And then in the Wahls Paleo, I advance the diet I add a few more foods, nuts, seaweeds, organ meats. And in Paleo Plus, we talk about why a ketogenic diet, a low glycemic diet, may be better yet, and then provide instruction on how to transition to that. And then we talk about lifestyle stuff. What else can you do? I talk about exercise and electrotherapy, and how to access that, and the challenges you may have in accessing it. We talk about toxins. And when we're born, we have many studies in Europe, in Canada, and the U.S. that our children are now born with over 200 different toxins, chemicals, pesticides, herbicides, solvents, plastics, flame retardants, Teflon, dioxin, hormone disruptors in our kids. And the environment we live in is filled with chemicals to make life easier, more convenient, more efficient. And because we eat so poorly, we're storing all that stuff in our fat in our brain. The reduced toxin load gives you more pointers on how to improve the efficiency of the elimination of toxins and how to reduce your exposure. And then we talk about supplements, vitamins, how to personalize that. Talk about labs to ask your primary care doc to get, and give you some pointers on how to talk to your primary care doc, and how to talk to your specialist who may be treating your autoimmune condition. And we talk about stress and hormones, and we talk about my recovery and the recovery periods I see in other folks. And then we have menus and recipes and resources to get you started on a new way of thinking and living. Quick reminder, yes, it's a very different diet, but I'm the only author whether in the paleo world or the Swank or the McDougals, that have said, use science to identify what are the vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, fats, amino acids that we know brain cells need, and then designed a diet, and then tested it, verified it with menus and recipes to say, yes, you have that. And I'm the only one who's actually had the nerve to do a clinical trial testing this. And then, the other thing, my colleagues think I'm really a bit crazy about this, I wrote a book, and I told the public what to do. So all of you can decide, is this such a low-risk thing to do, vegetables, that I could eat more vegetables, and that I could give up my sugar, I could give up the white flour, and I could even give up that yummy yogurt and ice cream, because I'm willing to give it 100 days to see what difference it would make. I'm giving you, all of you, the keys to the car. You could try it out to see if this is low risk enough that you're willing to try. Of course, you want to talk to your doc, make sure that your doc can tell you, do you have any medication-food interactions or history of kidney stones or liver disease that mean things need to be adjusted. Or if you're on insulin, they're going to have to adjust your insulin because things will change very quickly. So you have to talk to your doc. But if your primary care doc is not excited when you're going to say, I want to eat a lot of greens, sulfur-rich vegetables, and color, what do you think, doc? Is that going to be okay? Now, if your primary care doc is not excited, I would wonder about the quality of that primary care doc, or nurse practitioner, or physician assistant. Primary care should be very excited about this radical thing known as vegetables. So I want you to all go to my website, terrywahls.com, and download. There's a recipe companion that goes with this that you'll find to be very helpful. There's also a toxin disease chart that you get when you enter your email address and sign up for my newsletter. Great information. Do not miss out. Go home and sign up, please. It'll be very good for you. Follow me on Facebook, Terry Wahls MD. You can follow me on Twitter, Terry Wahls. And I think that is everything. I'd said it'd be 45 minutes. I think we're pretty close. We're going to stop for some questions. Yes. So let me summarize. You said eat seaweed. I ate a lot of seaweed, but now after the radiation accident in Japan, I quit eating seaweed because I'm nervous. I completely agree. In my book, I talk about resources. Maine coast sea vegetables test their seaweed for radiation, heavy metals, and I would recommend that you use either Maine coast seaweed or another company that also tests, and I think it's ocean approved. So they have some seaweed as well. And there may be other companies that are also testing their seaweed, but I certainly agree. You want to test seaweed. So the question is, what about the blood type diet? And I do not have any comment on the blood type diet. I've read the book. I have much more confidence in my approach of identifying what people need. However, we are all unique, and we all have a unique set of enzymes, and so you may find that the diet that I've created is not as helpful for you. But I have no comment on the blood type diet. Okay, so the question is, I've heard about a vibration machine. Does it benefit you for exercise? There are vibration machines that have been used by the Russians and the astronauts to help increase bone density and muscle mass. We've been doing that since the space program. The athletes have now started using that. There are clinical studies testing it, and some of the public is using that. You'll find in the book that I discuss the merits of the vibration machines in the exercise chapter. So in the book, the question is, I really would like to eat eggs. My friends are trying to convince me to eat eggs. They are trying to tell me that duck eggs are better or turkey eggs are better, and I'm really missing my eggs, and can't I please eat eggs? And she doesn't like eggs. Man, I really don't understand why she's asking the question. So in the book, I talk about food sensitivities in that the most common is gluten and dairy, the next most common is eggs, and then goes on down the list from there. And I also provide directions on how to give yourself a retest. But for everyone, I'd certainly take it off for at least 3 months. In the book, I discuss strategies for retesting. So the question is, how on earth did you get people to do such a difficult thing for so long, for so well? The first one is that we used a 2-week run-in, so they got to try out the diet to see could they do this or not. And so we lost 3 out of 10. So we had 13 go through the run-in to get 10. Then we called them weekly for 2 months and give them coaching. And if people are feeling better, their fatigue is going down, that when you have symptom reduction, people tend to improve. In my clinical practice, I encourage people to begin the dietary intervention that my patient and I agree on. And I pitch this as either a 30-day or 100-day, depending on what my patient is willing to agree to, experiment that they will run. And at the end of the experiment, they can go back to their old ways and see how that works out for them. It's far easier when people are in control. They decide when to do the experiment, and they can decide when it's a success or failure. I think it's very important for people to find their internal motivation and to be in control. So the question is, are there instances where the diet does not work when they were following the protocol? Yes, when you read the paper, you'll see that. Not everyone's fatigue resolved. And we're able to look at why that may have been. The one person whose fatigue really did not change had developed chronic leukemia, probably as a complication due to the Novantrone taken earlier in her disease course. Now, do I think this dietary intervention is going to be 100% effective for every single person? I think that's unlikely, and I certainly do not wish to make that claim. Do I think eating a more nutrient-dense diet with less sugar, less white flour will lead to improved health status for everyone? Yes, I think that is true. Will it cure their MS? I'm not sure. Will it improve their weight, improve all of their other biologic markers? Yes, I think that is true. Could they have other interceding factors that prevent them from having the marvelous results that I had? Of course. And in the book, I talk about why, if you're not getting the full results, you'll want to see someone who's gone through the training provided by the Institute for Functional Medicine for a more detailed evaluation to look at the other environmental factors so the recommendations can be personalized. You know, when you're doing a public health message for the world, you can't create a message that will fix every single person, because we're all unique. You can create a message that will, for a population, probably cause them to lose weight, have better cholesterol, better blood pressure, less inflammation, and probably far fewer symptoms if you did the medical symptoms questionnaire. Certainly for the population, I think we have that. Now we'll do more studies to see how broadly we can generalize this. But certainly in my clinical practice, this helps people with a wide variety of health problems, like the Wahls warriors that I showed you earlier. You know, this is really a fun, so the question is, nutrition's not talked about in medical school. I wonder how your cohort physicians are taking this information. So we'll go back to 2007. I really looked awful, gray, ashen, couldn't really sit up. I was in my zero gravity all the time. And then in 2008, I'm walking around looking pretty good riding my bike. And I got invited to give grand rounds for internal medicine to do the case review. And people were intrigued. And there were two camps. My physician colleagues either thought this was the most engaging, brilliant grand rounds they'd ever seen, or they thought I was, losing it. And I got criticized, and I think correctly so, that one case, so what? The question is, can this help anyone else? I said, you're absolutely right, we have to do a trial. So I wrote up the protocol, and Dean Rothman, who had been the chair of medicine who watched my decline and recovery, he had gotten promoted to dean. He facilitated getting some senior scientists on my study teams who have a sound design, because my area of research was not in this particular vein before. And then I met with Dr. Embry and the DJO makers to get the funding. Once we had the trial going on, every year at the University of Iowa, there is the College of Medicine Research Day and Internal Medicine Research Day. So every year, my team and I, we had one or several posters up with our preliminary data. And people would come by and they'd be like, it's pretty interesting compliance data you got there. Then pretty soon, we're showing how our MSQ scores are improving, we're showing how the fatigue scores are improving, and they're like, that's really that's amazing. Then we started showing our videos before and after, and they're like, oh my God, this is stunning. So the fact that I did the research, and I was going to say, you're right, one case, so what, we need to do the research, and then I went out, got external funding, got the research going, and are sharing the data, they're very impressed. Then the other thing that my colleagues who initially thought I was crazy by going to the public have now decided that this is extraordinary innovation because I am disseminating life-changing information. And we laugh, in Iowa City, the consumption of kale and greens is quadrupling year after year. When I go into the grocery stores, the produce guys come up and announce how well the kale's doing. It's very fun. So the question is, has there been any research into the acetylcholine content of the vegetables? Not that I'm aware of. I am pleased to say that we have frozen blood that we took every 3 months in our study. And so we can now have some conversations about what type of additional analyses that we could contemplate doing in that frozen blood, given now that we see have some very, very interesting clinical outcomes. Yes, so in 2007, when I was at my nadir, and I should give you a little fuller picture of that. I had severe fatigue. I was exhausted by 10 in the morning. I had lost my keys, my phone. I had to replace my phone 3 times that summer. My chief of staff told me I was going to be assigned to working in the traumatic brain injury clinic without residence. And I figured that was probably a kind way of them making me face, I was going to have to take medical disability, and it was going to be in the middle of January that I have to make this change. But as it turned out, I started making my change in November, and by January I don't have fatigue, and the clinic is fine. I realized this is the perfect place for me to be. And in March, I'm not quite sure what motivated me, but I decided I wanted to investigate doing saunas because I was feeling really well, and I knew toxin load was probably a big issue. So I went to a local gym and took a 40-minute sauna and felt great. I was like, wow. And so for me, the tolerance for heat kicked in about 6 months. Everyone's going to be unique. Not everyone will have that tolerance for heat come back, but many certainly have. So in my book, I talk about the fact clinically we've used this diet for people with mental health issues with tremendous success for those who are willing to do the diet. And it would certainly make sense that neurological disorders and mental health disorders would do very well. Autoimmune disorders do very well. High blood pressure does very well. Obesity does well. Chronic pain. I'll tell you the other thing that does extraordinarily well is, and we probably have millions and millions of Canadians and Americans who are not feeling well. They have fatigue, they have brain fog, they have irritability, they may have more headaches. They see their doc does an evaluation, they can't find a diagnosis, and they go, well, I'm not sure. So the miserable but no clear diagnosis. That's a great person for this kind of program because you get to the root cause of why they're beginning to be ill. So it's the question, what percent is diet, what percent is exercise, what percent is stress? Okay. Well, we don't really know. We'd have to break out this to really understand. So we do have studies going on looking at exercise, E-STEM. Another study going on, again funded by Direct MS Charity, that's using just diet. And that study will conclude in December. What we predict is that when you break things down to the component parts, they'll be somewhat less effective, that the whole picture is the most effective. My perception is the food is the bedrock. If you get the food wrong, you're not going to get better. So you got to get the food right. And the food can probably help with fatigue. You're not going to change motor functions unless you exercise. You have to grow more muscle. You have to grow those connections, and you're going to have to exercise. That's my perception. So the question is, can you tell me more of the mechanism for that individual? I cannot, because I was not there to know precisely what happened. I can simply tell you her version of the experience. Anyone adopting the protocol, absolutely, you need to talk to your primary care doc. Tell them you want to be eating more of whatever it is you want to be adding. Ask them, are there any medications, food interactions we have to worry about? And do we have to think about any concerns given my medical history? So things can be personalized based on your individual health issues. Kefir is dairy, so I would not consume that. In my book, I give you plenty of other fermented options.
You can make water kefir too.
And another person said, well, you can make water kefir, you can make beet kvass, you can make kombucha. There's a wide variety of fermented options out there that do not have to involve dairy or wheat products. Why does Alberta have so much MS? Low vitamin D is probably an issue. You likely have a high rate of people who have the DQ2, DQ8 alleles, which put you at higher risk of developing a food sensitivity reaction. There may be more toxins in your water, food, air supply. And you may eat a lot more sugar and have created a excessive amount of candida yeast and sugar-loving bacteria in your bowels. The book goes through the environmental factors, and you can sort of review what's going on in Alberta. Certainly the low vitamin D would be part of it. So the question is, are you still taking disease-modifying drugs? So I started this in the fall of 2007. Within 3 months, I couldn't sleep. And then I realized that I needed to stop the Provigil, which I'd been taking for fatigue. Within 6 months, I'm walking around the hospital, and I talked to my neurologist, who agrees that I can taper and discontinue my disease-modifying drugs. I've been on no disease-modifying drugs since 2008. I'd had steady decline since diagnosis from 2000 to 2007, despite seeing the best people in the country taking the latest, newest drugs. I went paleo in 2002. So the paleo diet was not enough to restore my health. I had to structure the paleo diet using functional medicine principles. I resumed meditating. I don't know why I ever quit, but I did. And I had exercised. You know, I'd been an athlete. I'd been a competitive martial artist competing nationally before medical school. So I understood that exercise was critical. I had exercised the whole time. So in the book, I have a long conversation about how to talk to your neurologist, how to talk to your primary care doctor, and I'm going to refer you to that section. I want you to work with your neurologist, and I remind everyone that in the end, you are the one who decides what you're going to take for medication, what risks you're willing to accept, what makes sense for you. And don't give up that position. You're the one who has to evaluate and decide what makes sense. I still, absolutely, you need to work with your physician, work with your primary care doc, work with your neurologist. You can, and in my book, I talk at length about how to handle those conversations. So in my book, I talk about the fact that I'm the chef. I work all day, I come home, I make the meals. I want to be sitting down within 30 minutes of starting, preferably within 15. I cook only once a day. And I talk about how I handle the other parts of the day. Now the menus look like I'm cooking 3 meals a day. We did it that way, so we gave people more menus, more recipes. But I tell you in the book, I cook 1 meal, I have leftovers and a smoothie in the morning, and because I'm in the ketogenic phase, I generally eat only twice a day. So the question is several. Are you cured? Are you healed? Do you have any lesions left? So I talk about in the book that yes, I have lesions, and to my great disappointment, and my neurologist's great disappointment, they are still there. And when I look at the scientific literature on lesions that are observed when you have a food sensitivity issue, if you've had those lesions for a long time, they stay. If you are symptomatic only for a short time, meaning just a few months, and you go take that food to which you're sensitive out of your diet, those lesions may resolve. The most important question is function. I can jog 1.5 miles. My wife and I do strength training 3 nights a week. I continue to improve. If I eat non-compliant food within 48 hours, I can anticipate a flare of horrific electrical pain. I anticipate that will be the case for the rest of my life. I will always follow the diet. And what I say in the book is, if the reasons we develop an autoimmune problem, high blood pressure, diabetes, mental health problems, Parkinson's, MS, we know that 70 to 95% has to do with the food you eat, smoking status, and physical activity level. If you fix that, you can have that healthy disease-resistant body reemerge. If you go back to that diet and lifestyle that created that inflamed, sickly, disease-prone body, you can bet those diseases will come back. This is not a diet, folks. This is a way of life. So the question is, do you have any experience with Lyme disease? I have thousands and thousands of followers and on Facebook, and I hope you guys will come follow me there because you'll see lots of conversation. And I've had many people tell me they have Lyme's disease, had taken antibiotics from a variety of physicians for years. They discovered my protocol, started my protocol, and began to recover. Now, why is that? My theory, and I'll admit this is just a theory, is that the most potent antibiotic that you could ever take is a healthy immune cell, is a immune cell that has all the proper nutrition, a vitamin D level that is optimized, a iodine level that has been optimized, and that you've taken out the inflammatory foods that were feeding the sugar-loving microbiome, that because those antibiotics killed off your microbiome. And there are a whole host of reasons why I think long-term antibiotics may not resolve Lyme issues. So I stress that you must work with your personal physician to personalize the program to your unique issues. This person said, I have sarcoidosis. I can't raise my vitamin D levels because that will create problems. Now, if you remember the Wahls warrior Julia Knight had sarcoidosis, diabetes, kidney failure, went on the protocol. I have no idea what she did with her vitamin D, and she was dramatically better. By all means, talk to your doc and say, I want to eat greens, I want to eat sulfur, I want to eat color. Anything that we have to modify so I can do that, and work with your physician. And I do have to remind everyone, all these comments are education. I'm not giving anybody medical advice here. You always have to talk to your doc. This is education. I'm not trying to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. But I'm trying to teach you how to feed your cells so maybe they could take care of you better. So the question is, what about low-dose naltrexone? I tried that, it did nothing for me. I am aware that for some individuals it has been helpful. So the question is, what about supplements? And I talk about supplements in the book. I think they really need to be personalized. When you take a supplement, you run the risk of getting the ratios incorrect. For example, minerals are cofactors for most of our vitamins. And you may read that zinc is an important cofactor for 200 different enzymes for your brain. So you start like, by God, this is really important, I'm going to take zinc. So you take zinc every day. But the problem is the receptors that absorb zinc also pick up copper. So now you're not picking up any copper, you're getting only zinc. And you're making yourself copper deficient. But you need copper for your brain to work. It becomes tricky taking supplements because you have to worry about the ratios. I talk about the upsides, the downsides, how to monitor your supplement use and work with your physician, and to give you some ways of thinking about this so you can personalize it based on your personal circumstances. So the book discusses laboratory testing and gives you some suggestions of what to consider. If you have someone who's been testing you for toxins, continue to work with that individual. I discussed this at length, and I talk about the hazards of being a paleo meat eater without vegetables, the hazards of being a vegetarian and not getting enough B12, and some of the protein issues, and the potential problems for vegans not having enough protein. And I also provide some rationales if you prefer to remain a vegetarian or vegan, how to do that in a safer fashion.